Good evening and welcome to 31 Horror Nights 2024. It's October 1st and tonight's movie is Five Nights at Freddy's. Yes, this was that ulterior motive I mentioned for playing the Five Nights at Freddy's games this year. I really wanted to get a feel for the series before I watched this movie. Did I have to make that feature-length series on my channel? Absolutely not, but I have no regrets. I love the way that turned out. Also, I did the math, and this 31 Horror Nights episode, is the 200th one I've put out on this channel. I had 11 months to prepare for it, so I figured I might as well go big. There was a long time where video game movies were like consistently bad, but in recent years, they've started to improve. The Super Mario Brothers movies was well received, Detective Pikachu was well received, the Sonic movie was well received when they changed the Sonic design. But here's the thing that Super Mario, Pokemon, and Sonic the Hedgehog all have in common. They are big billion-dollar franchises. Five Nights at Freddy's was a indie game made by one person. Just imagine what Scott Cawthon would have thought if you told him that it would become so huge when he was making the game back in 2014. Imagine what he would have thought if you told him that he would be co-writing a Hollywood screenplay for a film adaptation of this game. I watched the trailer, and one thing that I thought was interesting is that the fact that the animatronics are being possessed by the spirits of dead children is not something they even attempted to keep secret. There was no like pretense of that being a twist revealed in the movie. They went into it as like, yes, these animatronics are being possessed by the souls of murdered children. That definitely makes it feel like this was made not for like the general audience. This was made very much for fans of the Five Nights at Freddy's series, people who already know the lore. I keep saying that this is a Hollywood production. It's technically not. Blumhouse is an independent studio, but they have such a high output and they're so well known at this point. Tomato, tomato. And however risky this project might have been to take on, it paid off. This is the highest grossing Blumhouse production to date. So now, having played the games, having understood the lore, I am going to watch the Five Nights at Freddy's movie. I'll be right back. I thought that was good. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. If I didn't know the lore extensively or like have not played the games before, if that had been me when I had watched this, I probably would have said that this is okay and given it like a 7. One thing I can appreciate about this movie is that it's made by people who know these games inside and out. There are a lot of little things in this movie that someone who wasn't familiar with the series wouldn't even think twice about, just thought of it as, oh, something they put in. But if you do know, you realize that's an Easter egg. Probably the first really good example of this is in the first Five Nights at Freddy's games. You can hear someone like humming to themselves, like dum dee dum 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 dum, and that is Foxy. And there were at least 2 times in this movie where Foxy was approaching one of his prospective victims, and he was humming that song to himself. I don't really think I like registered this going into this, but I realized how big of a challenge it would have been adapting Five Nights at Freddy's into a movie. The story is told out of order. The gameplay is just sitting and watching security footage and closing doors. This is something where there would have to be changes here and there in order to like make a smooth transition from game to movie. And they did make a few changes, but none of the changes felt like way out of left field or like they didn't make sense. Shout out to this film's director, Emma Tammy, because there were a lot of shots in this movie where I thought, oh, that's really clever. That looks just like it does in the games. In the first Five Nights at Freddy's, one of the shots is Bonnie, Chica, and Freddy on the show stage. There's no animation on the cameras in the first game, so there's like a cut, and then one of the animatronics is like gone, and it's edited in a way so that someone looks at the screen, sees all 3 animatronics there, looks away, looks back, and then Bonnie's not there. And going into this, I think one expectation I had is that there had to be at least one moment where they use that overdriven scream sound effect from the first game, and they did. I thought the acting in this movie was pretty good. The lead was Josh Hutcherson, who I like. I think he's a great actor. The other lead was Vanessa. Her actress was good. Elizabeth Lale, she did a great job. There was also one of the leads as a kid, Piper Rubio, playing Abby. She did a very good job. But that's enough about the human characters. I really do want to say the animatronics in this movie look great. They really do look like the characters from the games brought to life. And the way they move, it is very robotic. There's nothing natural about it at all. When it comes to horror, I didn't think that this movie was particularly scary. There actually was one moment towards the end, though, that I thought was done pretty well. It was Abby's character hiding from Foxy. And it was just one of those moments of her sitting there behind like an arcade cabinet, and this murderous robot is like a few feet away walking up to her. And there was like really good moment of tension there. From a tonal perspective, this actually does feel a lot like the Five Nights at Freddy's games, so that sort of like dark humor. I kind of want to talk about spoilers, so I guess just to wrap up this part, it's clear going into it that they understood the assignment and the result was good. I didn't really think there was anything particularly great about the movie, but there wasn't really anything super objectionable about it either. If you like the games, you're probably going to like this movie just fine. If you don't like know the games, you're probably going to think this movie is like okay. And overall, this movie was pretty much what I was expecting. It was a pretty straightforward, faithful adaptation of parts of the story, and it was executed pretty well. All right, now I do want to talk about some spoilers. One thing they did in this movie that I thought was interesting is that in the original Five Nights at Freddy's game, you don't really know anything about the person you're playing as. That character doesn't really matter. It's just the night guard. But in the movie, they kind of had to have a main character, a protagonist. And what they did was that they took the character of Michael Afton from the games and sort of split his character into two. The protagonist, everyman, person that the audience is viewing things through is taken by Mike Schmidt, played by Josh Hutcherson. But he is completely removed from the situation at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. For some reason, they call it Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria in a training tape. Again, such nerd nitpick. That's literally not what it's called in the games, but whatever. He is completely removed from this. He doesn't know anything about this. He's just trying to live his life. He wants to maintain custody of his little sister. But in the games, Michael Afton also knew a lot about the situation. He was closely related to the situation. And that part of his character was taken up by Vanessa, who's a cop that really does seem to know a lot about Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. She knows about the missing children incident. She knows about the animatronics. And if they wanted to have both of those niches filled, it makes sense that they would have to do two characters. And I thought it was a creative and effective solution to that problem. I like the fact that they didn't make Mike Schmidt just like a blank slate character, just like regular everyman. Like there is something to him. When he was little, he was watching his younger brother, and he looked away for a few seconds, and he looked back, and the kid was getting abducted by someone in a car. And for some reason, he believes in like this dream theory that he actually did see everything, and he could like dream the moment up again so he can find more clues, figure out who took his little brother. And he does this by like playing nature sounds and looking at pictures of wood. That was like a really weird part of it. But it's just basically the idea of him wanting so badly to try to fix this mistake and sort of, I guess, make this feel better in his eyes, even though realistically the little brother is long since dead. There's nothing he can do to change that. And this actually does connect to the murderous animatronic part of the story, because the animatronics, they actually do take a liking to his little sister, Abby. Like, it said in the games that the animatronics, for the most part, they seem to work just fine with the kids. They don't seem to have any animosity towards children. It's adults that they go after. And this movie kind of shows off the duality of this, because there are scenes where they are violently murdering people. Like there's a scene where a bunch of people tried to break into the pizzeria and they were all killed in spectacular ways. I think probably the best scare in the movie was where one of the characters was looking at, I don't know if it was Freddy Fazbear or Golden Freddy, but she was like leaning forward and looking in the mouth. And the entire time I was thinking like, okay, the animatronic is going to bite her. But they actually were able to successfully subvert my expectations. When she gets really close, a child's hand comes out of the mouth, pulls her in, and you see the shadow of her getting bit in half and like half eaten by it. And then contrasting to that, there's this montage of Vanessa, Mike, Abby, and the four animatronics building this fort out of stuff in the pizzeria. And this movie does sort of drive home the fact that these animatronics are incredibly dangerous. They are very powerful and they are fine with killing people, but they are still victims. They are lost, confused souls of murdered children trapped in these animatronic bodies. There's sort of an element of this place, the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, being frozen in a moment of time. And it sort of illustrates the way that the souls of these children are trapped here. And they really just want a friend, they want someone to play with. There are two major twists in this movie. One that I absolutely knew about going into it. It was kind of hard to miss that one. The other one, I did read the summary on Wikipedia at some point, but I must have forgotten about it because this one actually did manage to surprise me. The first twist, the one that I knew about going into this, is that William Afton is in this movie, the character who killed those children, and he is a career counselor that you meet at the beginning. He's going under an alias. You don't know that's him. He's played by Matthew Lillard, most well known for playing Shaggy in the live-action Scooby-Doo movies. He doesn't sound like Shaggy at all when he's talking in this movie, though. He doesn't put on a British accent, but he definitely sounds very normal. Going into this, I did know that, but then there is Vanessa. When I was watching this movie, I assumed that Vanessa, maybe one of her siblings was one of the victims of the missing children incident, and she became a cop so that she could find the person who killed them and bring them to justice. That would explain why she knew so much about the situation, but that's not the case. She didn't just take Michael Afton's role of knowing a lot about the situation. She also took Michael Afton's role of being one of William Afton's children. William Afton is her dad. And when I was watching this, I was able to put together pretty quickly that it seems that William Afton in this movie is a career counselor where he'll take people, but pretty much on the dregs of society, on the brink of poverty, people that society won't really miss or make a big stink about when they disappear. And he's basically feeding them to this machine that he's created with the souls of those kids and the animatronics and this haunted pizzeria. And he is using Vanessa's position as a police officer to sort of aid in having all this get swept under the rug. And in this movie, William Afton has a sort of control over the animatronics. And it's a very abusive kind of control. And he has that same sort of control over his own daughter. She is afraid of him. And I think one of the moments in this movie that really did subvert my expectations is that there was a scene where she literally had a gun pointed at him and saying, it's like, I'll shoot you. And he said, no, you won't. I know you won't. And I was expecting him to actually be right. She won't be able to do it, but she does. She shoots him in the arm and he responds by stabbing her. That was a moment I wasn't expecting. But then we got probably my favorite part of the movie where Mike and Abby work together to communicate to the animatronics that this man inside the yellow rabbit costume is the person who murdered them, is the person responsible for putting them in this situation in the first place. And that's when they turn on him. And there's a really good moment of him realizing he's no longer in control anymore. And then we have this movie's version of the spring lock scene, the one from the third game where Purple Guy gets trapped in the Spring Bonnie costume. Except in that game, it was all at once. It was one snap, blood everywhere, he's spring locked. In the movie, it's slow and painful. It's one at a time, the different parts dig into his skin. It was definitely a lot slower here. And then we get the line, I always come back from him. One of the things that they did that I'm not sure if I really liked in this movie, I think that they're probably going to expand on this in the sequel that they're making, obviously. Of course they are. They didn't really do anything to give William Afton any sort of human traits. He's literally just a serial killer. We don't know anything about him or his motives. There was a backstory to William Afton in the games, but not really in this movie. I assume that in the next movie we might learn a little bit more about it. But the movie ends with Mike and Abby living a better life together. Vanessa is comatose in the hospital because she got stabbed in the abdomen. And the movie ends with the implication that William Afton in the Spring Bonnie costume might be coming back as Springtrap before the movie ends. Once again, This movie did manage to subvert my expectations in a few ways, in a few good ways, but overall, it is what I was expecting. It was a pretty faithful, straightforward adaptation of the games, and it was good. It's not really made for people who aren't fans of the game, but if you're going to make a movie for one very specific type of person, that niche probably should be people who really like the game that you're adapting. I can understand why this movie was such a success. I mean, it's not great, but it is made for people who like it, and it was made by people who like the original series. So I think that this movie was okay. And with that, we can kick off this year's Horror Nights.